Hi, this is a lecture I did a number of years ago, and it's been updated. It probably does not include all art that freaks people out. There is a lot of it. Uh, Certainly, you can always put in the notes on YouTube any recommendations to add. Maybe there'll be art that freaks some people out, part two. But there's a number of examples. And I'm going to go back many years and talk about a lot of works that have caused a sensation. But again, not all of them. So this is value in art, or what I like to call it is art that freaks some people out. Some people are very open to new art ideas. Other people not so much. And you do not have to love it. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with going, I don't like that. That's okay. There's different taste. But it's certainly nice to be open to new ideas. And I have had my opinion changed once I listened to the artist talk, or found out the artist's motivation, or found out the backstory. So your opinion can change. Anyway, thought I would start with this. I'll give you a quote. "The public has always had the option to ignore art if desired. In 1967, Congress funded the National Endowment for the Arts. An Arts in Public program began nationwide. It was usually required that 1% of the cost of new public buildings was to be dedicated to purchasing art." So if you've ever wondered as you drive around Irvine why there are so many large pieces of artwork in front of many of the buildings, that is why. Because literally, they were supposed to include a certain number of the budget for buying art. Now, it could be several pieces of art, or it could be one large piece of art. And sometimes, probably just because it was easier, they would buy one large artwork. And so this idea of public art became a thing. But how do you educate the public on what is art? And what is art to one person is not art to another. In fact, even with my students, I've taught art for a lot of years. Some people love the Impressionists. Some people hate the Impressionists. Some people love contemporary. Some people could completely leave it. And I'd like you to be open to new ideas. But again, taste is okay. So Alexander Calder was one example of this public artwork. And as you can see, this caused quite the reaction. I mean, we look at this and go, what's the big deal? It looks really industrial, looks big. Maybe I wouldn't want it in my front yard, but I really don't mind it in a business district. But in its time, La Grande Vitesse, which means Grand Rapids or great swiftness, this was not a good thing. So his work is very much respected today. This was described as mantis-like. I could see that it looks like a kind of an insect. If it was painted green, maybe even more so. But again, this was something that was not appealing to a lot of people. They thought it was an eyesore. Part of it, I think, is the juxtaposition of this bold, industrial, bright red work with this very, very traditional office buildings behind it. I kind of like the juxtaposition, but again, I think that's an aesthetic I've become used to. So 1969, he did a number of these. Some of them look very, very closely related. After you've seen a few of them, you're going to recognize them because they do almost look related. They look like cousins to each other. So you also have artists that will do work after Calder in the style of Calder. And so that can get tricky. You'll look at something and go, oh, it looks like Alexander Calder. It's probably something that was inspired by the ideas of Alexander Calder. So if you ever get a chance to go to Pike's Market in Seattle, which I highly recommend, a short walk away is the Olympic Sculpture Garden, not to be missed as well. Really, really wonderful. And there's also, not too very far, an Asian art museum. So there's so much to do in Seattle. So these are some examples of his work. He's perhaps best known for kinetic art, art that moves, this idea of the mobile. And he was very, very innovative in this approach. And he's credited with this idea of kinetic art. There's lots of kinetic art now. There's a lot of kinetic artists. A lot of them look really good in gardens. I'm always hesitant to put them in my gardens. I'm always afraid they're going to hurt the birds somehow. I have a lot of birds in my yard, but again, they're interesting. They have movement. They are not your typical painting. So these were very, very innovative and new, and not everybody liked them. I love this interview with Calder. It really captures his personality. Interview with Calder on color. Paul Cummings was the interviewer. The range of colors you use always tend to be rather bright. Yeah. And there's always a lot of red or black or blue and white. Yeah. For instance, you don't usually find green. Is there a reason you like to use those colors? Are those just the ones that work for you? Finally, words. Oh, I don't know. Sometimes I try to make it full of color, and sometimes I just make one, red or black. Always just happens. You know, you work in a direction to make 4 or 5 little objects like that, and then you go off in another direction. That's supposed to be the secret of success or something. So, not the best interview, but finally he did get him to answer more than one word. So here's a picture of him as a much older man. So he was creating these in the 1930s. Again, it was an interest of weights and balances and constructions, and they have this sense of movement. Sometimes you'll miss them. There is a small one that used to be at the LACMA. Now the LACMA's been remodeled. Who knows where they'll put it? But there's a small Calder that they own that they had up hanging up in the corner, and after a number of visits at LACMA, I finally noticed it. I was like, how come I haven't noticed that before? Just haven't looked up. So sometimes you do have to look up because you don't always get the details at these museums. This is an example of appropriation. This is an artist that has used the ideas of Calder, and he has basically created something new and innovative. So this screen printer, David Dodd worked with a curator to recast Calder's large still sculpture, La Grande Vitesse, with a garden theme as part of Art Prize. And this is from 2013. And as you could probably suspect, this was received well. I mean, it's been a number of years since the 1960s. This is not so shocking, not at all. So anyway, this was titled Flowers of the Riviera, homage to Calder's time in France. And it has magnetic flowers, mini hand cut to the 40-foot high arches in an attempt to add whimsy. But the Calder Foundation did not like it. There's always somebody who's unhappy about art. Marcel Duchamp, the Dadas would probably have called themselves, indeed they did, anti-artists. These are artists that were doing something entirely different. Um, it was after the war. They were deeply unhappy with aspects of the war and questioning basically what it is to be a human being. And so they were coloring outside the lines, very, very much so. And so they wanted to do things different. And so a lot of their ideas are still discussed today, still controversial today. And so Marcel Duchamp, who the P is not pronounced. You're going to watch video after video where they pronounce it Marcel Duchamp. It's not. It's Marcel Duchamp. And his work covers Cubism, Dada. He touches on surrealism. He's mostly associated with the Dadas. The Dadas were a group that came out of Zurich, and they were a group that was very interested in thinking outside the box and really questioning what is art. So he refused to accept the standards and practices. He always was thinking basically outside of the rules, and he refused to repeat himself, refused to develop a recognizable style, and he's an interesting artist. So this was called Nude Descending a Staircase. Again, you probably looked at that in the previous slide, weren't very shocked. So, oh, Cubism. In its time, this was laughed at a great deal. So much so that he actually ultimately removed it from the show early. He entered it into the famous 1913 Armory show. It was an important show for modernism in the United States, very important. It was Americans' first major exposure to modern art. 70,000 people saw it in New York. For that time, that was a huge number. Ultimately, 300,000 people viewed the exhibit in Chicago and Boston as well. It was described as an explosion in a shingle factory. And they said lots of different things about it in the news. And a lot of people were deeply unhappy with Nude Descending a Staircase. Now, they can't say it's vulgar because you really don't see body parts. It's very, very abstracted, but even so, they laughed at this work. President Teddy Roosevelt told the papers that the painting reminded him of a Navajo blanket. So again, it was coldly received, very much rejected. And he did not take it well. He became a bit of a loner and withdrew it, and he really kind of was done with painting, and he was on to sculpture and conceptual work. And again, his work is very, very, very way before his time. And so he also was a man that had a very good friend. His name was Man Ray, and Man Ray was a photographer. So Man Ray and him were very good friends. They were both part of the Dada movement. And so one of the things he documented was Marcel Duchamp liked to occasionally dress up as a woman in a time period where that was highly, highly unusual or very much outside of the norm. Now, of course, there is a great deal of acceptance about people playing with ideas of gender, exploring identity and gender, and again, we have the LGBTQ movement. There is a definite push to question these ideas of gender. And he was doing this way, way, way before his time. This is an example of a work called Rose, C'est la vie. It's spelled with two R's. They loved puns and plays on words, and sometimes the puns were very, very sexualized, even better. They loved that. And so this is an example of Rose, C'est la vie. This is Marcel Duchamp as Rose, C'est la vie. The hands were actually changed by Man Ray through photography. Let's call it early Photoshop. And he actually kind of slenderized the hands a bit to make them a little bit more feminine. But we see a number of these by Marcel Duchamp. So again, he was hugely before his time, 100 years before his time. So in any case, the painting actually changed his life. He said, if that's the way they want it, then there's no question about me joining the Cubists, the Futurists. One can only count on oneself. One must be a loner. And I think a lot of artists feel that way. They feel like they don't conform. They feel like they don't fit in. Marcel Duchamp was one of them. But at least he had the support of a man like Man Ray. And again, they were good friends. And Marcel Duchamp and Man Ray, might go to parties together. Man Ray was very, very well known for being a personality that was actually watched by many people because he was kind of a trendsetter. He'd usually have this beautiful woman on his arm that had this sensational makeup that he'd actually do for her, Man Ray. and they always kind of wanted to know what was going to happen when this couple entered the room. So the Dadas were interesting. And so this is Rose Salavi, and then also Duchamp in shaving cream. And he did a series of them in different aspects, and he looks kind of, I don't know, artistic. But again, he was very playful and very fun. So this idea of exploring gender certainly also was done by Warhol, but even in Warhol's time, this was considered very much unusual, very much outside of the norm. They were very much part of the other. His group of the Factory, these were artists that were very experimental and sometimes wild. There was a lot of drugs and partying, but there was also an awful lot of creativity that came out of the Factory as well. And so these are some Warhol selfies that are shown above. He loved Polaroids. In fact, Coste Fullerton owned some of those Polaroids. They actually had an exhibition a couple of years ago where they had a number of Warhol's Polaroids on the wall. And it was a really, really interesting exhibition. And so here again, you also see an example of Marcel Duchamp playing with this idea of gender and self. Do we know anything about Marcel Duchamp's sexuality? Not that I know of. I think he was very private in that way. But he was also, again, an artist that was very experimental and very much before his time. So back to this one. So the public just really hated it. It was ridiculed, laughed about, but it did make him kind of well known. But even more shocking was the ready-made. So this is some additional images of Rose Salavi. And so, and some additional images of the shaving cream as well. So the ready-mades. Duchamp submits this porcelain urinal, not too big. He names it Fountain. The work was submitted to the 1917 exhibit of New York Society of Independent Artists. He was part of this group that decided that they would accept anything. They would have a $6 application fee, which in the early 1900s, this would have been a lot of money. I'm guessing around $100 or more even. So it was a lot of money, but you could enter your artwork into this exhibition in New York Society Independent Artists exhibition. So playfully or seriously, not entirely sure of his motivation, but he did like to mess with people. He takes this urinal. First of all, he doesn't even put it in the right position. He turns it sideways. You know, the drain is on the other side. He signs it R. Mutt, probably a pun on Mutt Ironworks, maybe Mutt and Jeff Cartoons. But in any case, more than likely, I would say the plumbing company. But the work was rejected. Well, it wasn't supposed to be rejected. And so this was supposedly open to anyone. So, of course, he found this pretty frustrating. And so this was the original, now lost work. Of course, there are some works that were reproduced from the artist that are kind of official copies of the original, but we don't have the original because, again, it was lost. Most likely thrown out. His sister actually threw out another one of his works, so it's entirely possible it was just thrown out in the trash. So this is Marcel Duchamp's Fountain 1917. And again, it's signed with the pseudonym of R. Mutt. And it is basically saying, this is art because I say it's art. I'm an artist. I have artistic credentials. So he signs it and says, this is art. And this becomes what Tate Modern considers one of the most one of the 10 most influential artworks of all time. What it does is it empowers the artist. Now, I'm not going to take all of you along on me with this on this journey. Not all of you are going to buy this, but it is empowering because it basically gives artists the credentials to say it's art because I say it's art. Now, when I used to teach this in my Intro to Art class at Fullerton College, and sometimes in my Intro to Art class at Cal State Fullerton, I actually used to bring in this potty chair, child's potty chair. It was clean. And I signed it, and I dated it, and I put it on a pedestal, and I said, okay, this is art. You know, I'm an artist. I've sold artworks. You know, I have art training. And I certainly have studied art for a number of years, and I've certainly taught art for a number of years. So I have a lot of credentials, okay? So this is art because I say it's art, right? But that isn't entirely the way the art world works, and they're not entirely accepting of this. So we had a discussion in my class as to whether or not this potty chair was indeed art. And I guess you could make an argument that it's an appropriation of his artwork because I've taken some of the ideas and I've reproduced them in a new and innovative way. But it's not really art because it's not truly original. And in the United States, there is a real strong belief in original artwork. And that's what makes it valuable. So Dada, the term Dada is this kind of playful, like child jabber, like a child might go da 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 da. I ran a daycare for 8 years. They make these noises, ba ba ba, da da da, pa pa pa, all those things. If you've ever wondered why they say Dada before they say mama, it's because of an infant produces the P and D, those sounds first because those are some of the earliest sounds they learn. They're what they call a labial sound, that it's kind of straight off the front of the lip. And so p, d, these are words that a child learns first. So it's not because they love daddy more. It's because it's easier to say. Sorry, dads, but that is true. But part of the Dada movement was this idea of getting down to the basics. It's playful, it's fun, it's babyish, and it could be wild. They had performances. They might jump around the stage and bark like dogs. It was completely unexpected and random, nonsensical, ridiculous. And again, it began in Zurich. And it also kind of became a movement that became well known internationally. So highly unusual art and poetry readings, musical events where again they might have really interesting musical instruments. Excuse me. And so this is Hugo Ball at the Cabaret Voltaire. And so again, if you went to these events, you knew you were going to see something different. This is art critic Raoul Haussmann, and this is also an aspect of Dadaism. So you can see the collage and the sense of childlike quality to the works. And so, you know, in many ways, this is a predecessor to movements like art brut, which is this idea of getting back to a more childlike, basic artworks as well. But again, it's also been very influential for other art movements. So it's also had its share of controversy. A plain white urinal crashes to the ground, splitting jaggedly in two. This is a crude animation that fronts the website of Pierre Pinicelli, a 77-year-old French performance artist. Early last month, Pinicelli grappled with Marcel Duchamp's fountain, chipping it with a hammer at the Pompidou. He first assailed its pristine surface in 1993, urinating on it and going at it with a hammer before being arrested, fined, and jailed. His justification, he wants to give the work back its force, give the work back its power. So he was a performance artist. He puts this as part of the performance. And anyway, it certainly didn't go over too well. at the Pompidou. So here we are. You can see the result of that incident. So another source tells us that he was arrested after attacking the urinal, created in 1917. Again, it's considered one of the most influential artworks of all time. So he was fined. He was given a 3-month suspended sentence. And weirdly, this was the second time he had attacked the urinal. So hopefully he's done with that. It's been a number of years, though. So weird facts. Urinal bought from J.L. Mott Ironworks for its naming as art. Committee rejected it. Marcel was part of the committee and did not reveal that he was the pseudonym. A real fountain lost, again, probably thrown out. Official copies were reproduced. At one point in time, you could buy them for $25,000. They're worth well over $1 million each today, probably more. So it empowers the artist. Again, I can take you along on this or not, I understand. So he also had a friend that was in publications, and so it ends up being publicized in The Blind Man, and they talk about basically any artist paying $6 could exhibit. So it basically becomes news. He basically promotes it, and he wants a response about it. So this is kind of a big thing in modern art is fountain. It's one of the key works in modern art. You may like it, you may hate it, you may think it's funny. I do. But I think Marcel Duchamp is a fascinating artist. And if I remember, I will put his last work that was a secret work, that was an installation. It's at the Philadelphia Art Museum today, and there is a brief clip on it. And it is unusual. And again, it's way before its time. So in any case, the Blind Man's magazine, published under Duchamp and Beatrice Wood, said, now Mr. Mutt's work is not immoral. That is absurd. No more than a bathtub is immoral. Whether Mr. Mutt made it with his own hands or not has no importance. He chose it. He created a new thought for the object. So there we are. So interest in the ready-made, again, this is one of those terms in art history. A ready-made is basically any object that you take and you say, okay, I'm going to sign this, I'm going to name this, and call this art. Now, are you going to always get away with it? No, but he did. It has been appropriated. This is an example of one that is at the one on the stand is at the Broad in Los Angeles, and Sherry Levine did some of these works, basically an ode to Marcel Duchamp, and a number of artists have indeed done this as well. But hers, of course, is quite different. It's gold, and because of the shape, called it Buddha. So again, this idea of copying famous works, we call it appropriation. And so in a way, Marcel Duchamp also was using appropriation. He was appropriating an object, he was signing it, he was naming it, and he was calling it his artwork. So it is an appropriation itself. And so as a feminist artist, Levine remakes works by male artists, basically to add women to that list of this long list of male artists in art history. This is another example of appropriation. This is She's Duchamp retrospective exhibition in 2000 to 2001 in China. And this is where she actually photographed these figures. These are not real figures. It looks like Chairman Mao, but it's not Chairman Mao. So she has, again, created these figures, photographed it, and it's a spoof of Duchamp's work. And indeed, it kind of shows you, what might Chairman Mao have thought of this artwork as he's gazing at it in complete puzzlement. Marcel Duchamp also did the work LHOOQ. So this was 1912. This is where he simply takes a work, he appropriates it and changes it and makes it new. And so LHOOQ 1912 indeed has the iconographic Mona Lisa. And, this is art history, the Mona Lisa. And so he signs it. He adds this mustache to it. He calls it LHOOQ. And this is a way of making her new again, essentially. But fun fact, she was hanging in a classroom in one of the classrooms that I taught in years and years ago at Fullerton College, where I taught in Fullerton College for 10 years. And she was hanging in there, and one of the students after the class came up to me and said, "Did you know that somebody came in and did something to the Mona Lisa?" And I explained that yes, someone did something to Mona Lisa. It was Marcel Duchamp, and that we would get to it, but it actually is a true artwork. So even today, it's getting questioned. Oh, and one thing I should say about LHOOQ is LHOOQ, if you're French speaking, LHOOQ, let's say I have a really good French accent, I don't. If you say it in a certain way, it sounds like in French, she has a hot ass. And so it's also a pun. And he loved puns. If they were a little bit, again, sexualized or playful, all the better. So I've mentioned appropriation a few times. Again, it's to take possession of another person's imagery or sounds or literature, but you change it enough that it's not the same, that it's not plagiarism. But that's where it gets really tricky. You have to change it enough that it's not a lawsuit. And sometimes that is very difficult to discern. But this is appropriation. So he has appropriated her and named it LHOOQ. And it is a bit different, but it's certainly very similar as well. Now, I thought we surely have to talk a little bit about the Mona Lisa. This is an art history course. The Mona Lisa is perhaps one of the most famous artworks of all time. It's produced by Leonardo da Vinci. It's not very large. A lot of people are surprised when they see it. They're expecting it to be this huge portrait, and it's not. It's pretty normal size. And they do believe they know who it is now. That for years and years they weren't sure, but it is believed to be Lisa Gherardini, and she became nicknamed as La Gioconda, the wife of Francesco del Giocondo. And again, this is accepted by most art historians. She's in the Louvre. She's hugely popular. People wait and wait and wait to get a quick shot of her, take a picture of her, and move on. But she's so much more than that. I mean, you see something that demonstrates a lot of the key aspects of Leonardo's work. That kind of smoky background, we call it sfumato, and this enigmatic smile, which has been discussed for centuries. They think she was actually probably smiling at Leonardo da Vinci, and there was also uh, some story that he also hired musicians to kind of entertain her while she was sitting for him, which, she was a woman of some means, and so that's possible. But even so, she's mysterious because we don't know all the answers. She actually has a very, very, very thin veil if you look very, very closely. So some have suggested that that demonstrates that she was probably pregnant. She also could have just been coming in from church because if you go to church, even today in Florence or Rome, you have your head covered, you have your knees covered. You can't just go in there in a shorts and a tank top. You have to have some sort of head covering and no shoulders, no knees, and they're very strict about it. In fact, they make a nice little business selling shawls outside the church doors for 10, 12 more euros. But in any case, that also, again, may also indicate that she was pregnant. That's what one art historian has said. Miles have been written about this particular work. Indeed, he carried it with him most of his life on his travels to different places. So it was something that he admired a great deal. And it's said that he also made another copy of it. On his deathbed, Leonardo, at 67, said, "I have offended God and mankind by not working at my art as I should have." So the great Leonardo was insecure about his artwork. So I find that very reassuring when we're all questioning our skills and measuring ourselves against other people. Be true to yourself. So uh, it's very realistic. It has been appropriated over and over and over again. And again, that sfumato, that smoky effect, that background, that is what they also is one of the signature things of Leonardo da Vinci. Perspective is well developed. He's a Renaissance artist. Renaissance, of course, was a rebirth of classical. And again, they also, it was a time period of remarkable change and some remarkable artists. So through X-rays, original hair was in bun. Women with hair down was not always considered virtuous. She could have it down for her husband, but it would be covered and or up at other times. So Mona Lisa means basically my lady, or like Madonna. It's a little more respectful than Mrs. So here are some additional appropriations of the Mona Lisa. You have Botero. Botero is known for these much fuller figured portraits, large men and women. And then you also have her with the little John Lennon glasses up in the top corner with a little peace emblem. And on her clothing, you have kind of like a Van Gogh pattern of spirals. So she was stolen. That's one of the ways in which artworks are often made famous, like the Scream. It was stolen. And it puts it in the news, kind of gets it out there. People know about it, and so consequently, it becomes an important artwork. So this work has been spoofed so many times. It's not oil on canvas, it's oil on poplar wood. It's been touched up several times, changing minor details. Da Vinci was rarely satisfied. This is Tyler Shields, a New York contemporary artist. I thought this was darling. Some of them online, they don't give you the attributions, so I do what I can do. I try to attribute whenever possible. Warhol's Brillo boxes. Well, how is that controversial? It is. This is one of those things people stand in front of it and scratch their head and go, how is this art? Even today, I see people respond that way to Warhol's work. So the question of, is it art or is it not art? These are, again, some of the things that are questioned about when people look at commodity culture, at this idea of taking something you see every day and reproducing it and making it into art. And so these were produced in the 70s. It was a refabrication of some 1960s work, silk screened, inks on plywood. Danto, an art historian, argued that works such as this announced that the Renaissance art no longer existed. He argued that art was not dead, just reinvented. Danto found contemporary art extremely vigorous, showing no sign of internal exhaustion. But again, other people look at this and go, how is this art? And it really does baffle a lot of people. And people have often asked me, is there something that you see or that you're baffled by? And I have to admit, every once in a while they get me because I was at a museum. I'm pretty sure this was at the Whitney. And I turn the corner and I walk into a room and it looked like the first slide. And it's called Adrian Piper's Cornered. And at first I thought, is this someone's office? What is this? Uh, I had no idea I was walking into an installation. I didn't even recognize it as an installation until I happened to notice the didactic or the plaque on the wall that was giving information. And then I was like, oh, so I'm the first to admit that occasionally the museums get me too. I'm like, really? So it does happen. And Adrian Piper's work Cornered, which she's done in different versions and installations, again, depending on the space, uh, it got me. I was a little baffled. But installation is something that even today people question of, is it really art? And yes, it is. And Adrian Piper is an interesting artist. She's a conceptual artist. She uses language, text, rhetoric, visual media, and often her themes are racism and this idea of people having a fear or hatred of strangers or anything that's foreign to them. So she does like to kind of make you feel unstable at times, make you question. That's kind of part of Adrian Piper's style. So here's some other examples of cornered. So the Pietà, controversial? Yes, believe it or not. A lot of the images that I'm going to show you, you're going to be surprised that they were controversial, but the Pietà is one. Um, so 24-year-old Michelangelo was made famous by this work. He produced the famous Pietà at the Vatican, and it's really, really hard to believe that anyone would find this particularly shocking. Now, before this, pietas were usually carved of wood. They weren't nearly as realistic. There was this fear that if you made it too realistic, that it would be as if you were worshiping that object. So this idea of it looking too realistic was concerning to people. Um, he once said, if life is pleasing to us, death, which was made by the hands of the same creator, should not be displeasing to us. So he produced it when he was 24 years old, and indeed, people were attributing it to a different artist. And so he surreptitiously got to that sculpture when there was no one around at night, and he engraved his name across this strap that's on her dress. And my understanding is he was later uh, sad that he had done this. But it did make it clear that it was by Michelangelo, and it is Michelangelo's only signed work, and it is also one of his most important. So, but we're also going to get to a much more controversial Virgin and Mother in this discussion. So this is the Pietà, Renaissance, triangular construction, sculpture. She's Mannerist, larger than life. You know, her lap looks huge, but it's also holding this important figure of Christ. And then before that, this is what was typically more accepted, was these wooden forms of Virgin and Child. So there was no misunderstanding that this was a real person. You know, even the babies don't look like real babies. They look more like little old men in medieval art. It's one of the ways you can tell the difference between Renaissance art or medieval art is oftentimes a medieval art. The baby looks like more of a miniature old man than it does a realistic baby. When you get to Raphael, of course, the babies look, you know, big and beautiful and plump, and they look a lot like a baby you might see today, but the babies in medieval period, not so much. So this is in St. Peter's, Rome. It's a must-see for a lot of people. Certainly was for me. And again, he was a mere 24 years old when he created this gorgeous work. Again, it was something that he did sign. So if you look right across the breast of the Virgin, you can actually see his name. And then there's some details of it. But yes, here's some more examples. You can see more of the details here. Just absolutely gorgeous, how realistic it looks. It has been attacked. It's been attacked, and that one of the reasons why they have it behind special glass now is because people have attacked it. People have also tended to touch it, which after time can actually wear off, like the fingers. When you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people daily going through and touching it, that can be problematic for sculptures. But when people have also been mad at God or mad at religion, or it has been attacked. So she has had some repairs done to her as well. So hard to believe that this has also been controversial, but very much so. Now, when I saw it, it was really quite remarkable because you enter from the front and it's to the right in this niche, and there is an oculus right above you with this mosaics all around, and the mosaics are largely gold. It's beautiful, and the light is coming through the oculus and it's shining directly on the Pietà. Do I think it was intentional? Yeah, I do. I think that at a certain point, a certain time of day, that idea of light coming through the oculus and just shining on the sculpture was something that was intentional. I just happened to be there when it was doing it. My camera, of course, wasn't able to kind of capture it, but I did try to do it in different views. So this is something I found that to be true. One of the Pietas that I had an incredible enjoyment of is one that was at the Duomo. And the Duomo is considered a late work of Michelangelo. It's an unfinished work of Michelangelo, and it's gorgeous. And you can get close to it. You can get within a foot of it. So to see this is a quote from New York Times Review, to see the artist Pietà in Rome, you could wrestle the crowd and try to glimpse the top of Mary's head, or you could visit this museum and get right up to it. And so this is really, if you should get there, make sure you see this as well, the Pietà that was done at the end of his life. And indeed, Nicodemus, who's the figure behind, is actually a self-portrait of Michelangelo himself. Just incredibly beautiful. And on the Duomo sculpture, you can actually see the scrape marks, you can actually see the artistic process. I found that pretty exciting. So he probably intended to leave some of the statue group roughly carved, but again, I don't think it is completely finished. The polished figure of Mary Magdalene on the left was finished by one of Michelangelo's students, while storytellers relate that part of the damage to the group was inflicted by the master himself when in a moment of rage and frustration he took a hammer to it. That fits in with his personality. He did have a temper. So this Nicodemus was the leader of the group of Jews called the Pharisees. Again, it's at the Duomo. The details of it are just exquisite. The difference in lighting, that's all because of the color of the slide here. You're just getting the difference in lighting. The Duomo Pietà. So this was carved for his family tomb for a memorial for himself and his family. By 1547, he was 70 years old, and again, his mortality was certainly on his mind. So it is interesting that he includes himself in this, but again, it was for a family tomb, so that makes sense. But again, it's must-see if you make it to Florence, the Duomo Museum, which is just outside the main cathedral, the Duomo. So 1990s, we have another Pietà. And this Pietà was extremely controversial. And this is Chris Ofili's Holy Virgin Mary. It again offended many, many, many people. It was in the news. The British-born artist was actually raised Catholic, and yet in the background you have small little butts, basically, that have been cut out, and in art history we call cherubs putti. So these little tiny cherubs, or putti, and so you have these little booties basically all around these cutouts to kind of symbolize angels, I guess. But that wasn't as shocking as some of the other things. They didn't like the inclusion of elephant dung in the mixed media. There are these rolls of elephant dung that are included in it as well. One is by the breast of the Virgin. They didn't like the stereotypical wide nose. They didn't like the stereotypical big lips. And in any case, it bothered a lot of people. So made of paper collage, oil paint, glitter, polyester resin. This is what we call mixed media. Elephant dung, it's huge. It's 8 by 6 feet. I've seen some of Chris Ofili's work, and some of them look really, really kind of appealing. All the colors and all the textures. But I have to admit, I don't know what I would have thought seeing this at the museum. And again, it bothered a lot of people. And so, but again, art is about free expression. So 2 balls of resin covered dung with pins stuck in them spell out the words Virgin and Mary. Another ball of dung defines the breast. And so there have been Black Madonnas in art. That's not all that shocking, not all that shocking at all. This is the Madonna at the House of the Black Madonna in Prague. And then you have another example in the middle that has this very, very strong Byzantine look to it as well. So there are gorgeous Black Madonnas in art history that don't include poop. But again, This was very controversial, and I think to a certain extent it still is. Um, in fact, the mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, said the city would cut its funding to the Brooklyn Art Museum unless the museum canceled Sensation. The show included installations with animals in formaldehyde, sculptures of people with genitalia on their faces, and this was the one that really, really bothered him. And so he was very outspoken in his thoughts about this particular work. But art's not always beautiful, and so according to this particular professor, Giuliani's reactions appear to be based on the narrow definition that art should only be beautiful, and an equally narrow picture of a Virgin Mary who looks like Ingrid Bergman, according to Michael Davis. Ingrid Bergman's a beautiful, famous actress who's white. But in any case, this was very controversial. And Davis is referring to medieval images like the one that's shown here. So let me move on. So here's an example of putti or cherubs in art, very different than Chris O'Feely's interpretation. The detail is from Nicolas Poussin, and he's a 17th century artist that's associated with the classical school, neoclassicism. Paul Cézanne was a great admirer of Poussin. So you can see how that might cause some controversy. Now, there is a really fascinating clip, and I will look for it online, of Sister Wendy, who's a nun, actually talking about how some of these controversial works she doesn't find controversial at all because, you know, basically at least it's opening up a dialogue. And anyway, I will look for some of those clips and include them in the portal. In any case, this work includes images of the mouth that resemble female genitalia, elephant dung. It was also part of the original Sensation exhibition, which was hugely provocative. And interestingly enough, it had a problem because of the elephant dung. They had difficulty importing elephant products, so they actually had to apply for an exception. So can't even make some of this stuff up. The second image there is called Chris O'Feely Popcorn Tits, 1996. And this was one that was also included in the Sensation exhibition that was sponsored by Charles Saatchi. That was very controversial in the UK. And so made of acrylic, oil, polyester, pins, paper collage, and of course the material that has made him famous, elephant dung. So here is another example of his work. And so in any case, he's definitely been in the news because of his material choices. And so here's another example of his work as well. Now, this idea of incorporating fecal matter in a painting is not entirely new. Pierre Manzoni in 1961, Artist Shit. It's believed it's actually probably, let's hope, canned plaster, but who knows? But in any case, Piero Manzoni's Artist Shit is also a notable work in art history. So he produced 90 cans of Artist Shit. Each was numbered. Tate's work, the Museum Tate, work is number 4. A label on each can, produced in Italian, English, French, and German, identifies the contents as artist shit. Tin was sold for 124,000 euros at Sotheby's in 2007. His artist shit can sold for 275,000 euros in Milan. So, wow. So again, I think his work is interesting. I'm not sure I would invest in it and put it on my wall, but again, I think art can be provocative. I think art can open up discussion, and I think his work does that. More artist shit. This is Paul McCarthy's Complex Shit, 2008. I think this might be the most times I've used the word shit in a lecture. In 2013, in South China's Morning Post, a sudden downpour deflated the oversized tower of excrement, complex pile, leaving behind brown mess. And stuff happened before. The work was carried 200 meters in July, and this was a number of years ago. And the sculpture by Paul McCarthy was equipped with a safety system that should have deflated it. The fake feces have been returned and will be on display at the Zentrum Paul Klee in Bern until October. So you can't even make this stuff up, huh? And so again, it's just wild. So this is complex shit. A strong gust of wind carried it again in Switzerland's Paul Klee Center. Just another source. And again, this was in 2008, so a number of years ago. And they said a faulty safety system is to blame for flying shit. I'm sorry, this looks disturbing. This aerial shot of complex shit. More recently, 2019, yes, we're seeing it again. This is Gelatin is the group. Installation view of Vorm, Fellows Attitude, 2018. And so I kind of think they look like yams myself, but again, more fecal matter. Okay. According to Gelatin member Wolfgang Gantner, the question isn't why poop, but why not poop? A video discussion accompanying the group's recent show of monumental turd sculptures further clarifies the choice of subject matter with references to democratic art and how we all create it. Starting at the earliest age, the 4 giant piles were set atop oriental rugs to accentuate their high art status. And the young woman, or what appears to be a young woman, on the corner of the picture with the interesting appendage on her pants is also interesting. So. Oh, and this is Mark Quinn. Mark Quinn is also an artist that has used interesting materials in his artworks. This is called Shithead. So turd-centered works of art have appeared before, and here we are again. Mark Quinn followed with Self, that was also made from his own blood, and with a Shithead, which is above. So the painting is sealed with epoxy resin as well. Shithead once again uses the artist's own feces. So the 90s was very much about the body, urine, fecal matter. These were things that were showing up in installation. They're showing up in different mediums. Now, Ophelia's work also shows some recognition of the late performance artist Hannah Wilke. Hannah Wilke has these little tiny bubblegum vaginas on her face. She's a feminist artist, and she was involved in performance art early on in the 70s. And so this idea of these little tiny repetitive imagery of butts on one hand and little tiny vaginas on the other, I think you can see the connection. So again, the human body has been very much about what some of these themes were. So Carol Finley coated herself with chocolate, Santiago Sierra tattooing prostitutes, and the question came up in Art News, how far is too far? And we continue to push those limits. So she's been labeled body-centric feminist artist in this article. And here again, you also see vaginal imagery, which in art history we call core imagery, C-O-R-E, core imagery. And so core imagery, vaginal imagery, again, very much part of feminism. And again, making very, very clear that women should have a voice in art history as well. Starification Object Series, 70s and 80s. She lived until 1993. She died of cancer at a fairly young age, as did her mother, and she documented the process in her work. I think it's some of these images are some of her most powerful. So again, it's about the body. So she actually documented her own fight with cancer, which I thought was pretty brave. Some of her prior works were highly exhibitionist in nature. She had no trouble with nudity whatsoever. So in one museum installation, she was actually caged in and nude in a museum. She's also appropriating the art history of the past, imagery like the sacred goddess, the Minoan snake goddess, the Venus of Willendorf. These, again, archetypal goddess images. And these are done in ceramic. Centuries ago, Grunwald's crucifixion was intended to inspire awe, to make one understand that suffering is part of life. It was commissioned for a hospital to offer empathy to patients, and indeed the figure is greenish. It's very, very difficult to look upon, apparently. Patients could see the work and pray for strength. And Guillermo Gomez Peña and Robert Cifuentes used the cross to make a statement. And his work has also been extremely controversial. And his work is often about the border, which has no easy answers, even today. And Columbus Day, 1986, they staged an event at Imperial Beach where the border between San Diego and Tijuana meets the Pacific Ocean, dressed as with the binoculars of a border patrol agent in one case and with other stereotypes from both lands. They burned a ship representing Columbus's maiden voyage to discover America. Performance writer and artist and an educator, he's continued to return to questions of immigration and the border as his theme since, again, the early 1980s. And it's still, again, very much a theme. Crucified themselves for 3 hours on 16-foot crosses. He said it was a symbolic protest against immigration policies under Governor Pete Wilson. So this has been a while back. They were dressed as stereotypes of Mexican men, banditos, a gang leader, In a more recent picture, he has artist labeled across his forehead. So, born in Mexico, again, known for his observations about cultural life of the border and problems of the border, and again, this question of immigration and legal and illegal, and these are all themes in his works. And this is from the article from New York Times, "Kiss Me, I'm Illegal." From his website here, he has all these tchotchkes and imageries, and you have sugar skulls, and kind of looks like an altar, and you have this bright, vivid color that is reminiscent of Mexican culture, and he puts it all together in this Tijuana Niagara 1980s project. And from his website, The Temple of Confessions. Are you spiritually empty, sexually lonely, politically confused? Two border saints from a pagan religion recently banned in the Southwest have found sanctuary here in the virtual barrio. And if you think his tone sounds somewhat tongue-in-cheek, yes, very much so. Once you enter this site, be prepared to confess your fears, your desires, your fantasies and mythologies regarding the Latino and the indigenous other. And I think you could see why this might be provocative to many. And so this is, again, a new type of artist, a political artist, an artist diplomat, an artist interventionist, an artist that definitely has the theme and definitely wants to have discussion about controversial topics. And so his work is controversial now, controversial then, and again, the theme is ongoing. And so born 1955, so that places him, in his 60s now. And there's some more recent pictures as well. So considered associated with shock art, as are many of the artists that I've talked about in this. Performance art, again, he exaggerates things, garish, colorful. He trained at Cal Arts, began performing performances as part of the Grupos movement in Mexico in the early 70s, and has been very influenced by the Chicano art movement as well. In 2001, he did fetish-sized images with 10 Australian artists who formed themselves into what looked like historical tableaus. The audience walked into what felt like a party space with dioramas, but the images were extreme, highly sexualized, and ethno-mutated, says Winning. Throughout the night, the boundary between the performers and the audience becomes broken down as the audience members participate much more fully than they might have thought when they walked in. So, again, over the line, you decide, but it does get your attention. On Fear of the Other, performance poem, Gomez Peña. Do you hear the political sirens? Beautiful America. What a beautiful, scary place to be. But then living in fear is normal for us. We're all scared of the immediate future. By the way, are you scared of me, of my accent, my strange intelligence, my obnoxious capability to articulate your fears? An articulate Mexican can be scarier than a gang member. Que no? Are you scared of my mustache, my unpredictable behavior, my poetic tarantula, my acid politics, my criminal tendencies, my tropical diseases, my alleged ancient wisdom? So, again, he's provocative, but he's very interesting as well. Police wasted no time responding to a kidnapping report of a blonde preschool boy at a cafe. Officers went to the Coronado, guns drawn, found suspect with child, no kidnapping, Mexican performance artist who deals with race relations was with his son. The boy was spending the weekend with his father. He'd had lunch with his ex-wife and son and went into a taxi to a friend's house. The two women diners called 911 since the child was being bribed with a fun weekend and toys. His ex-wife is dark-haired, but not Latina. Gomez was aghast at the racist implications. So this is very paraphrased, but it was in the LA Times in 1993. He said recently, I just turned 60, which is quite dramatic if you consider that I'm a radical performance artist. And so, again, known for his political bravado, uncompromising irreverence, notorious for speaking in border tongues, he calls it Spanglish glossolalia, and spending 3-day periods inside a gilded cage as an undiscovered Amerindian. So he has definitely pushed the boundaries. He says, I'm growing white hair, a pot belly, and a double chin, and my voice sounds reasonable. A cruel curator friend of mine tells me that I am no longer feared or desired, but respected. Ouch. He's a character. Andre Serrano. Andre Serrano pissed Christ. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of this one. And so Andre Serrano is a photographer, and he likes to do what they call straight photography, no gimmicks, no special effects. What you see is what I saw when I looked through the camera. And Piss Christ is actually a submerged crucifix in a glass of urine. If I had not told you that, I don't know that you would have found that particular image very disturbing. But the whole urine thing, that is where a lot of people lost it. So Piss Christ, it was attacked, as many of these controversial works sometimes are. After the attack on the work, opponents of Piss Christ held an hour-long prayer meeting outside the gallery at lunchtime yesterday. So some very conservative Christians had a lot of problems with this, and I think most of us can understand that point of view. The National Gallery of Victoria's decision to end the Serrano exhibition just 2 days after it opened followed 2 violent attacks against the photograph, Piss Christ. And so it was very controversial. But mind you, it's a photograph. It can be reproduced, and the artist is still alive, so the artist can even reproduce it and make it very original. So again, it's a small plastic crucifix in a glass of the artist's urine. The piece won a prize at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Arts Awards, again, sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts, which, of course, National Endowment for the Arts is sponsored also through taxes. So that also makes it controversial. So a reclusive English nun, Sister Wendy, has no problem with a photograph of a crucifix immersed in urine, but lay people at the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia see it as profane and want it destroyed. Only a few weeks ago, Sister Wendy, whose second calling is art history, she's now deceased, but she did lived a nice long life, was telling PBS Bill Moyer that Piss Christ by Andre Serrano is the artist's way of conveying sadness over the disregard of Christ. If a bride of Christ can accept Serrano's photograph, what's the excuse of the vandals? A 51-year-old man ripped the work off the wall, damaging it. But again, it was easily reproduced. The second image is Dante's Inferno. So similar themes, questioning religion and classical mainstream past. The next day, an 18-year-old took a hammer to the work, destroying it. Likely Senator Jesse Helms has the answer. With Serrano's work in mind, the senator introduced an amendment banning a national endowment of the arts grants to artists who denigrate religious beliefs. Congress passed the amendment. Clinton vetoed it. So who defines irreverence? And it's an interesting question. Censorship and right to free speech, these are all questions that are interesting. So this classical male figure, orange, surrounded by bright diffuse yellow light, while many details of the photograph recede, certain elements appear in focus, such as the laurel wreath and constellation of bubbles. So this was produced as a series, late 1980s and 90s, highly controversial in its time. It depicts religious and classical figures submerged in various bodily fluids, such as blood or urine. And so Serrano, who is Honduran and Afro-Cuban descent, was raised Roman Catholic. So here we see the artist in front of the vandalized artwork. And I liked this quote. Christianity has had a pretty tight grip on Western thinking for a couple of millennia. It can probably take an insult or two if that's what Piss Christ is. It can be restored. Again, it's a photograph. Serrano has had truly astounding amounts of media exposure, which also gets him attention. And protesters get the prospect of a minute of martyrdom in court, and Christianity stands firm. Little harm there. It will all be over soon. And this is from the Australian newspaper, Jones. So National Endowment of the Art funding was put under scrutiny under Senator Jesse Helms, and it was argued about because they supported Robert Mapplethorpe. Robert Mapplethorpe was exploring homoerotic themes. Some of his photography was extremely sexualized. I don't think you could argue about his skills as a photographer. However, his skills in his photographer is really quite amazing. Very, very sharp, beautiful lines, beautiful contrast. And again, he was exploring a lot of controversial themes. Homosexuality was something that was largely not really talked about. And so this was something that was shocking to many people. Homosexuality had been around for centuries, but for whatever reason, it really, really, really was a huge big deal with some of the extremely conservative Christians, and it was also a political debate. But basically, the bottom line is that artists should be free to create what artists want to create. This particular work of the two men almost looks as if they're sitting at grandma's house, with the exception of that very, very interesting table with the antlers, and it looks a little bit exotic. And then you have, of course, the sadomasochistic underpinnings here as well of this homosexual pair. But again, very controversial in his time. This is one of the tamer images. You can feel free to Google Robert Mapplethorpe's imagery. He's also very famous for his beautiful still lifes and also his portraits of celebrities that were really quite remarkable as well. You could have also called this art that was not well received, because a lot of art is not well received. It's very surprising to a lot of people when they discover that Michelangelo's David was not well received. Hugely popular today. Main tourist attraction in Florence today. It was originally set up to be outside. Original is now inside at the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence. He was in his late 20s when he produced it. It represented David's triumph over Goliath, a biblical story, which symbolized the city overcoming both the Medicis and Roman Catholic domination. So there was underlying political themes to this work. This work, of course, is in art history a classic. Everybody admires this work. It's huge, has contrapposto, that beautiful contrapposto pose. and it's done in this Carrara marble, and of course David is just so beautiful and handsome, but it's hard to believe just exactly how controversial this was. Protesters, supporters of the Medicis, threw things at it, and it actually had to be carefully guarded. But again, today it's known for its beauty, its aesthetics, and it's very much admired. Contrapposto pose means weight shift, that slight S curve that you see in sculpture sometimes, and certainly you can see it in these works. And Renaissance means rebirth, so it's looking back to the classical past, so it's looking back to classical sculptures like this. And then, of course, there's the early Renaissance work of David, a younger David, and again in that contrapposto pose. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, David and Goliath, was produced 100 years after Michelangelo Buonarroti's David, so young, definitely I think younger than Michelangelo's version, more vulnerable, less confident, shows a sharp chiaroscuro of which Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, known as Caravaggio, was well known, who's also very much interested in naturalism. Now this particular portrait of Goliath actually includes a self-portrait of the artist, Caravaggio. He died quite young, in his 30s. So Ellsworth Kelly, born 1923, died fairly recently, 2015 at 92. Painter, sculptor, Chanel, printmaker. And he, of course, is known for hard edge painting, bright, brilliant color, minimalism, and for many people, this is inexplicable. A hard edge painting is an approach to abstract painting that became popular in the 1960s. It has flat colors, sharp, clear, hard edges, meticulously rendered. And it looks easy. It's not easy to get that even color, to get it essentially no brushwork. It really has to be seen. But for a lot of people, this is very, very inexplicable. Minimalism is inexplicable to many. It was something that was a movement, it was historical, it was part of the 60s. Do we still see minimalism today? Yes, definitely. And it was very spare, kind of an anti-art movement, certainly kind of anti-painting or academic painting. But there's something very appealing about abstract, minimalistic painting as well. So movement and style stressing reduction of form, minimum colors, values, shapes, no attempt to represent or symbolize any object or experience. Very much open to the viewer, also known as ABC art, reductivism, rejective art. Confusing to many? Absolutely. Shirin Neshat, Rebellious Silence. This is from the Women of Allah series in the 1990s. Gelatin silver print and ink. And she was very interested in the role of women in Iran. She's been ostracized in her country as well. A mixture of text and image. It's startling. High impact Muslim woman in a chador, which only reveals the hands and the face. In Iranian culture, it conceals her sexuality and rejects Western dress. A militant rifle divides her face as well, which I think you could also talk about being symbolic of her Western self and her Iranian self, which is at times conflicted. So she's born in 1957, lives in New York with her boyfriend, and again, she cannot return to Iran at this point. So Nishat is immediately known for her signature kohl eyeliner, very dramatic. She says, "I never go out in public without it. It gives me a sense of security." And this was from an interview in Harper's Bazaar. And you can see she's a very striking artist. So overview, Nishat, not a photographer, organizes, designs her work, performance, photography, installation, lives in New York, educated in high school and college in the US. The poetry and the calligraphy, which calligraphy is often considered sacred, is written in Farsi. Works are intimate, confrontational. She's exiled from Iran. She cannot return. She said it was important to portray a theme from within in order to create something pure and not to succumb to the pressure of drawing parallels between two cultures, yet still her emotional conflict between the two cultures, I think, reads clearly in her work. Again, that the vision of that weapon between the two sides of her face. So haunting, dramatic photographs, very creative. Again, this one also has the Farsi calligraphy around it. And her work touches on outsiders, feeling like an outsider, martyrdom, exile, basic civil rights for women that are often denied. Self-portrait, Shirin Shot, again, confronts stereotypes. Woman is shown as cautious, unpredictable, dangerous. She shows the ambiguities of the stereotype. Western society views women as repressed. Islamic view is that the chador shows solidarity. By wearing the item, it does not reveal their sexuality and gives them more equality. It is determinedly ambiguous. Gender politics is also a part of her subjects, part of her themes, repression of women through fundamentalism or cultural exoticizing. So Islamic law does not allow women to sing in public, which also shows up in her installation and video performance works. Unveiling, 1990s, the use of mehndi, which is the decoration on the hands. It's also associated with celebrations. Henna on hands and feet. Temporary skin decorations are sometimes, of course, show up in her work as well. And text, over and over again, text. And this is at the Hirshhorn Facing History. So she's very much contemporary right now. So Unveiling, 1990s, and this includes text from the poet Farrukhzad. I've always thought mehndi is beautiful. I actually had some mehndi done on my hands at a museum. But here are some examples. Again, they're often done as part of a celebration, but hers is done as part of her art. She definitely is interested in her work as a feminist artist, certainly questions stereotypes, and certainly wants to kind of understand perception of the veil and just basically to make it more of a subject of discussion. Bad art teaches you as much as good art, maybe more, according to Jerry Saltz, an art critic. Maurizio Catalan, this is a view of the exhibition Caput. Creepy, interesting. Will we be talking about his work in 50 years? Probably, but who knows? But Maurizio Catalan is a very controversial artist and is certainly an artist that I may explore in future lectures more in depth. He's known as the Joker of the art world. Catalan, the Ninth Hour, or Pope Struck by a Meteorite. You can imagine this probably didn't go over really, really, really well. And in the top corner, there is a detail or a close-up of this work. So Pope struck by a meteorite as he's holding a cross standard. So, here he even shows the glass that is around the meteorite as the so-called meteorite came into the building. So it has all these details. So the question was, what is it like knowing your work is worth so much? It's like going to sleep 14 years old and waking up 30, he says. Things that maybe seemed a joke before are now taken more seriously. And so there's a portrait of the artist in the center there. So, but he's done an artwork of Hitler praying, which of course is extremely controversial. And of course, we also have the Pope here. So his work goes above and beyond controversial. He definitely likes to shock people. So this shows Pope John Paul II struck down by a meteorite and the broken glass from an imagined window or ceiling littering the red carpet. It was read as an attack on the aged and reactionary pontiff, and so it was. But now, however, the life-size figure of the Pope dressed in ecclesial robes and clutching a crucifix has a tragic comic quality, representation of universal knowledge and infallibility felled by a random cosmic accident. And this is a quote from Art Space. But I mean, this was a very much admired Pope, so this would be very, very controversial, especially if you're Roman Catholic. So his work has been described in the tradition of Marcel Duchamp, the Dadaists, and the Harlequin Jokers of his native Italy, using humor and satire. And then here you can see Ninth Hour displayed in another gallery. It's interesting to see how it looks in different juxtapositions, different positions in the gallery. And this is Maurizio Catalan. They buy an idea, they buy a certificate. And this is a quote from Maurizio Catalan. And this is 2019 Art Basel, Miami, and this is Comedian. And I think a lot of people were completely freaked out by this. This was when a banana taped to a wall sold for $120,000. Everyone went crazy about it. It was all over the internet. I'd be surprised if you didn't hear about it. You can certainly go on YouTube and get more of the backstory. But basically, you were selling an idea, and you're selling the fact that it was produced by a famous artist. Will this be valuable? I hope not, but who knows? It's just such an abstract idea. Ai Weiwei, another controversial artist and one that I admire a great deal. He presently lives in Germany. He is also not exactly welcome in China presently. He has been teaching and has had a visa, and again, he has spent a lot of time last few years in Berlin doing work. China gave him back his passport, but he likes the creative freedom in Germany. And again, I still don't think he's quite welcome in China. They may have given him back his passport, but I would think that he'd still be pretty nervous in China. He has been jailed. He has had his studio destroyed. He gets followed everywhere he goes. To say he's tormented is an understatement. He has done things to tick them off, admittedly. Han Dynasty urn with Coca-Cola logo. He takes these these ancient, important works from the Han Dynasty and remakes them with Coca-Cola logos, or he dips them and does drip paintings on them. So this is called According to What? Colored Vases, 2007, 2010. Now these are indeed Han Dynasty vases that he buys and recreates, but for many they consider it, of course, a desecration. So Neolithic culture pot with Coca-Cola logo, 1992. And so this, being this very, very American logo, has been something that he juxtaposes on these Han Dynasty vases. And it's also about freedom. There is a lot more artistic freedom in the United States than there is in China. And so he believes in complete artistic freedom, and the Chinese government has regularly had conflicts with Ai Weiwei. He also documents almost everything on social media. Honestly, I opened up an Instagram account not because of family, not because of friends, but because of Ai Weiwei. You know, that is one of the ways in which he communicates with his followers and lets people know what's going on in China and what's going on with his studio. He's been very, very vocal. He's also quite the humanitarian. He's very, very sympathetic to immigrants, which is, of course, a very complicated, difficult situation, and immigrants all around the world. He's very sympathetic to. Fascinating artist. He grabbed attention fairly recently with with the decision to pose as the washed-up body of deceased 3-year-old Syrian refugee Aylin Kurdi, who drowned after his boat capsized in the Mediterranean Sea in September. His body was found off Lesbos. And so this is from February 2016. And this is, of course, a quote from Ai Weiwei, his Instagram: "The seashore is my studio." And then this is what he's basing that image on. It was very much recognizable because this image was very much in the media, and then Ai Weiwei emphasized it and emphasized these problems with refugees, and so and boats, and seeking freedom in other countries. So these are questions he's explored a great deal in his art, and there's no easy answers. So Syrian war is going on for more than 4 years when Kurdi's parents lifted the 3-year-old boy and his 5-year-old brother into an inflatable boat and set off for the Turkish coast to the Greek island of Kos, 3 miles away. Within minutes, the wave capsized the vessel, and the mother and both sons drowned. A few hours later, Nilüfer Demir came upon Alan, his face turned to one side as if just asleep. There was nothing left to do for him, she said. There was nothing left to bring him back to life. This is the only way that I could basically express the scream of his silent body. So a pretty heavy picture. Weiwei said he just thought of it and then posed like the dead Syrian child. He had an installation at the Berlin Concert Hall a few months later, and he returned to this theme of the drowned Syrian boy, the Syrian refugee. And of course, many of the followers of Ai Weiwei and other people that were interested in the story also did their own protest. And in the bottom corner, you have the Berlin exhibition that was done with Life Fest. So all of these life vests were trekked into by Ai Weiwei and created an installation. An installation, of course, is a space that the artist takes over. It can be an outdoor space as well. It doesn't always have to be an indoor space. And Ai Weiwei basically organized them and puts them into these artworks to catch national and international attention. I admire him a great deal, and I hope he's alive in 10 years because he does all kinds of things, especially to take off the Chinese government. And so here he took a very traditional facade and he covered it with these life jackets. Here you can see 14,000 salvage life vests were used for this installation. These were not ones that they found at the store. These were ones that were salvaged as a result of this crisis. F Lotus. Um, F Lotus, the F word is a word that Ai Weiwei is very comfortable with. He also likes to take pictures of, there's a number of pictures of Ai Weiwei flipping off important icons in Western culture and Eastern culture for that matter. And so F Lotus, I think you can kind of guess what that means. It was formed of 201 rings, each holding 5 life jackets to look like a lotus flower. And this was, these were found in, again, the Greek island of Lesbos, where he set up camp. They were arranged to show the letter F and float in the pond like lotus flowers, which are, of course, peaceful and meditative and associated with Buddhism. And his works are very, very powerful. He's very, very well known, and I think he's one of the most important artists in the world right now. I was supposed to see him speak at the Hammer Museum, and this was a couple of years ago. And when I got there, his plane had been canceled due to weather, and so they were just going to show a documentary of his, which you can find many of them on YouTube and Netflix, and I recommend you watch some of them. He's really interesting. But again, his works are extremely powerful. Last semester, one of my students in their student comments at Cal State Fullerton said, "How is it that I've never heard of Ai Weiwei?" He said, "I really, really liked learning about Ai Weiwei." And so, again, that's the point of art, is to make us think. We don't have to agree with everything, but at least it brings things to our attention. So thank you.